When asked about distance education, you would often hear this: an easy way out of the stress in a regular class setting, and an assurance of a degree or certificate, a diploma mill, and a profit-generating institution. This is the representation of distance education for a lot of people. What is interesting is that distance education has been present for over a century, yet this mode of learning has been underappreciated by many. In other countries, distance education has been the new norm. They had identified that distance education is effective and efficient for students, and had the same, if not better, results in terms of learning compared to the traditional mode of instruction. But what exactly do we mean by distance education other than having a separation between teacher and learners? Would Sesame Street, for example, be considered as distance education? This report seeks to set out some of the theories governing distance education, theories that have undergone significant research, evaluation, and implementation. One of the theories pertaining to independence and autonomy was proposed by Rudolf Manfred Delling of the Deutsches Institut für Studienforschung of the University of Tübingen in Germany. In 1968 and 1978, he wrote about the helping organization, his term for the distance teaching institution. Keegan cites Delling as defining distance education as a multidimensional system of learning and communication processes containing these 8 dimensions: a learner, society, a helping organization, the distance teaching institution, a learning objective, the content to be learned, the result of learning, distance, a signal carrier. Notice the absence of the teacher in his list? This is deliberate. Delling's focus is on the learner, on his independence and autonomy. As for the helping organization, it is supposed to provide full support at the start, the stage where the learners need the most guidance. Then, as learners become more autonomous, the main responsibility of the helping organization shifts to provide information, documentation, and library facilities. Despite Delling stating that distance education is a planned and systematic activity which comprises the choice, didactic preparation and presentation of teaching materials, as well as the supervision and support of student learning, and which is achieved by bridging the physical distance between student and teacher by means of at least one appropriate technical medium, Delling places DE outside the realm of education. This exclusion is further evidenced by his exclusion of the teacher from the 8 dimensions of DE. To Delling, the place of distance education is in the communication process, and concerned more with the medium for transmitting or sending out communications to the distance learner. A second theory pertaining to independence and autonomy was proposed by Charles A. Wiedemeyer, a professor of education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His contributions to distance education began in 1961, and in 1981, he published his work Learning at the Backdoor. Charles Wiedemeyer rooted his theory of independent study in the ideal of learner freedom. Wiedemeyer characterized independent study as one in which the student and teacher are separated. The normal processes of teaching and learning are carried out in writing or through some other medium. Teaching is individualized. Learning takes place through the student's activity. Learning is made convenient for the student in his or her own environment. The learner takes responsibility for the pace of his or her own progress, with freedom to start and stop at any time. Buchetta states that Wiedemeyer's construct meets the criteria of a theory of distance learning. She states that if one were to use Wiedemeyer's ideals as guidance, one would design instruction that is individualized, fosters learner autonomy, and provides appropriate support, teaching, all of which may make the instruction more effective for the learner. Furthermore, Wiedemeyer's theory seems relevant to distance learning today. His theory comprises 4 elements of distance learning: teacher, learner or learners, method of communication, and instructional content, which closely resembles a currently accepted definition of distance education: institution-based, formal education where the learning group is separated, and where interactive telecommunication systems are used to connect learners, resources, and instructors while specifying the importance of learner autonomy and self-responsibility. Wiedemeyer still highlights the role of the teacher in distance learning. This distinguishes his theory from Delling's, or from the self-study models. Michael Moore, one of the supporters of distance education, developed the theory on transactional distance. This does not pertain to physical distance, rather it refers to the effects of physical distance to the learners. This is the psychological and communicative space that needs to be crossed. This is a space of potential misunderstanding between instructors and learners. Transactional distance may be evident in a classroom situation where students may be physically present, but in terms of the learning process or learning transaction it may be lacking. The effects are more noticeable in DE since there is the separation of the teacher from the learner. Oftentimes, this creates a potential misunderstanding in the reading materials provided. In a way, this concept was able to identify key factors that would be able to overcome the transactional distance experienced by the learner, dialogue, structure of the program, and autonomy. By universe, more means a continuum, a three-dimensional construct where instructional dialogue, program structure, and learner autonomy are all moving along the X, Y, and Z axis to create different balances. More does not prescribe an ideal balance between these three variables, but instead leaves it to the instructional designer to find the right balance between the three, given the specifics of his learning audience. Some of the literature on Moore's transactional distance recommends beginning by determining the degree of autonomy the learner is capable of, then setting the program structure and instructional dialogue accordingly. For example, if seeking to address a grade 5 class, one should assume a lesser degree of learner autonomy than if one were addressing a graduate program class. The lower the degree of autonomy, more structure and dialogue is indicated. Moore says that students with advanced competence as autonomous learners appeared to be quite comfortable with less dialogic programmed with little structure, more dependent learners preferred programs with more dialogue, some wanted a great deal of structure. So the designer for the grade 5 class has a choice of raising the level of structure of the instruction, or increasing the amount of instructor dialogue, or some combination thereof. Thus, we see that Moore's theory of transactional distance is more of a prescriptive design method for distance education rather than a theory of distance education in itself. Theory of equivalency aims to provide a theoretical basis for judging the appropriate amounts of each of the various forms of possible interaction. The major impact of the theory of equivalency is that we are given the chance to mix and match interactions that would give the best result in terms of effective and efficient learning process, as well as practicing interaction and independence of the learners. The three components in the process of interaction according to are the student content teacher. The students being the recipient of the knowledge and requires a meaningful learning, teacher being the donor of knowledge and assumes proficiency, mastery and expertise in teaching, and lastly the content or the body of knowledge. This requires mechanism through various ways, either information from the teacher or channel through different modalities using technology. This entire process is in the context of interaction. Student interaction is the first type of interaction. This primarily focuses on interaction between the student to the teacher, content, and their classmate. Student-to-teacher interaction can be automated through the development and use of content resources, and especially those utilizing autonomous teacher agents. Student-to-student interaction is critical for skill proficiency needed for collaborative or cooperative tasks, but the most effective learning to reach these goals maximizes. Student-to-content interaction is the most accessible and most readily adapted via individualized student portfolios that can influence design, assessment, or delivery customizations. The second type of interaction is the teacher interaction. This type of interaction can be transformed into learning objects or methods such as video, animation, assessment programs, etc. This refers to the teacher's interaction between the teacher to the student, content, and their co-teachers. Teacher-student interaction is the least scalable type of interaction, thus is usually substituted for by student-content interaction in mass education systems. Teacher-teacher interaction is basically a collaboration among teachers and is critical to the current model of university-based research production and evaluation. Teacher content reflects the structure and flexibility of the course materials. The last interaction is content interaction. The value of the content is dependent on the extent to which it engages students or teachers' interaction, leading to relevant knowledge construction. There is also a direct relationship between this capacity for interaction in terms of engagement, mindfulness, and motivation of the learner. All these types of interaction is highly driven by usage of any technological means. Theories of distance education seem to abound, as evidenced by the sampling discussed in this report. But for practical purposes, and limiting ourselves to a Philippine context, it seems as if the acid test should be pragmatism. What can benefit the greatest number of students now struggling with the sudden shift to distance education? There is a lot of potential in developing distance education. This is a journey to an uncharted sea where great discoveries and possibly a change in perspective on how the education system should work and should be developed to cater to the needs of the learners as well as teachers.